Welcome to CinemaFreak, my new channel devoted to one of my favorite things, the movies, and occasionally TV as well, specifically horror and sci-fi. This is the first of many videos that I have planned with reviews, discussions, kill counts, and top 10 lists to hopefully keep you entertained week after week. So hey, if this sounds like something you are interested in, help kick off the channel by hitting that like button and subscribe for future content. With that being said, I decided to leap into the fray with a top 10 list because everyone loves a good controversial list, and I'm sure this is going to be one. We're going to talk about one of my favorite horror icon creatures that just doesn't get enough love. There are plenty, and I mean plenty, of great vampire or zombie movies out there, and we'll get to those guys in a future list, but one of the most underrated are werewolves. But finding a fantastic or even decent werewolf movie isn't easy, so today I'm going to go over some of my picks. Let's see where your favorites come in at. Starting off our list at number 10 is Cursed. Released in 2005 and written by horror veterans Wes Craven and Kevin Williamson, who previously worked together on the Scream series, Cursed definitely lived up to its name. The film suffered numerous production and script issues and was postponed for over a year. While production was stalled, several cast members had to replace due to scheduling conflicts. Some were even cut entirely, including Skeet Ulrich, Mandy Moore, Omar Epps, 80s guy Corey Feldman, even Heather Langenkamp of Elm Street fame. Some of them had even filmed scenes which ended up on the cutting room floor. Another legend in horror, FX artist Rick Baker did the werewolf effects for the original version of the film, but once Miramax ordered reshoots, all those scenes with Baker's effects were deleted and replaced by some rather mediocre CGI. Final nail in the coffin for the success of this movie came when it ended up having to be recut from an R to a PG-13. Both Wes Craven and Kevin Williamson were seriously unhappy with this film. Despite all of that, Cursed still lands on my list. It's got a decent cast with a young Jesse Eisenberg and one of my favorite actresses, Christina Ricci, Wednesday Addams. Plot of the movie is rather simple, with Eisenberg and Ricci as brother and sister who get into a car crash and attacked by a werewolf that's been terrorizing Los Angeles. Soon they find out they are becoming werewolves themselves, and the only way to stop it is to kill the one who attacked them. The movie is good fun, and I suggest watching the unrated version to really see the best bloody parts. I debated on adding this one to the list as Underworld is more of a vampire flick, but the third outing puts more focus on the werewolves. A prequel story set in the Dark Ages, it offers up a unique origin story of Lucien, who we know from the first two films is having a bit of a beef with the vampires. Lucien, played once again by Michael Sheen, returning to the role, is the first werewolf able to take human form, a bloodline that would come to be called Lycans. Victor, the tyrannical elder of the vampires, captures Lucien's werewolf mother in a raid. After she gives birth to Lucien, the first human child born of a werewolf, Victor kills her, but decides to spare the life of the infant. Victor envisions a race of werewolf slaves for his clan that could keep guard during the daytime hours as the vampires slept. Over time, Sonia, Victor's young daughter, and Lucien develop a forbidden love for one another. As tension between the Lycans and vampires grow, Victor discovers Lucien and Sonia's secret love affair, after which he sentences his daughter and Lucien's unborn child to death for betrayal of the vampire clan. Lucien soon leads his werewolf brethren in revolt against the vampires, and thus the war between vampires and werewolves begins. I always enjoyed the Underworld movies since seeing the first one, as they are action-packed with a pretty good story and lots of cool battle scenes. Though this outing doesn't feature Kate Beckinsale, it does have Verona Mitra playing Sonia, Victor's daughter, and the return of a few of the original Underworld stars, including Bill Nye as Victor. The Dark Age theme of this movie was a great setting, and seeing the history of how the feud between Lycans and vampire kind started was a great story. The werewolves themselves look great, and the costuming is top-notch. This is also actually the last Underworld movie that I really enjoyed, as the later films pretty much fell flat with me, and not even the return of Kate Beckinsale could save them. Number 8 on my list is Bad Moon, released in 1996. Despite the mediocre reviews and low-budget CGI, Bad Moon quickly gained a cult following among horror and werewolf fans. Bad Moon is based on the novel Thor by Wayne Smith, which mainly tells the story from a dog's viewpoint. Confused? Don't worry, I'll clear that up in just a moment. The movie starts when Ted, played by legendary 80s and 90s star Michael Pare, and his girlfriend are attacked in the jungles of Nepal while on a research trip. Wait, hold up. Why is there a werewolf in the jungle? You know what? Never mind. Not important. Anyway, Ted survives, but is now afflicted with the curse of lycanthropy. Ted moves back home near his sister and isolates himself from society, trying to find a way to live peacefully and hopefully cure himself, but it's a losing battle as people keep showing up dead from animal attacks. His secret starts to unravel when visited by his family and their pet dog Thor, who senses something's up pretty much immediately. And this sets off the idea of the film, where an extremely loyal good boy does his best to defend his family from the werewolf intruder. Eventually, his sister figures out what's going on, and this leads up to the conclusion of the movie with a dog versus dog man. The story offers up an interesting take on a typical werewolf movie, with the real protagonist being Thor. Honestly, special effects may not be all that great, but they get the job done. There's some decent kills in this movie. I had never actually seen or heard of Howl, which came out in 2015, until I started working on this list. After watching it, it definitely belongs here, possibly even as a higher ranking, but I settled for the 7th spot on this one considering what it was up against. This movie is just great and definitely keeps you on your toes. Plot centers around a train traveling through the European countryside when it has to stop in the middle of nowhere after hitting a deer. I'm pretty sure a deer would be no match for a train moving at this speed. It does its job as a plot device to set up what's to come. As the driver gets out to check the train and get them on their way again, he gets attacked by a beastly fiend, and thus begins a night of terror for everyone involved in this fatal trip. One of the few movies on my list that feature more than just a single lycanthrope, the remaining passengers now have to survive the night trapped on a train being attacked by a pack of werewolves that appear more human-like than wolf-like, and a creepy, well-done makeup effect that really makes them more terrifying than what we typically see werewolves portrayed as. There's also no humanizing angle to these werewolves. No Taylor Lautner without a shirt for the teenage girls to swoon over. This movie shows them only as the predatory beasts they are, with realistic and relatable characters fighting for their lives to make it to morning. Despite a low budget, the special effects were fantastic, and setting everything in the middle of the forested countryside with no help for miles makes an eerie atmosphere. If you haven't seen Howl, I highly recommend it. Silver Bullet from 1985 is one of my favorite 80s films. Almost always one of the first ones I think of when I think of werewolves. Always brings back fond memories of growing up in the 80s for me. Based on the Stephen King story, Cycle of the Werewolf, it stars none other than the 80s icons Gary Busey, Pre-Crazy, and Corey Haim. When murders start piling up in a small town, some of the townsfolk take matters in their own hands, thinking it's the doings of a serial killer. They quickly find out, though, that it's not the case, as they are brutally slaughtered in the fog of the woods. Marty, a paraplegic young boy played by Corey Haim, gets attacked one night and learns the truth about the killer. It's a werewolf. Because that's what this list is about. He escapes after shooting a firework into the creature's eye, given to him by his Uncle Red, who also gave him a souped-up wheelchair that Tim the Toolman Taylor would be proud of. Yeah, I gotta say, Uncle Red may not be the most responsible uncle by today's standards, but hey, this is the 80s and fits perfectly in line with the kind of uncle I imagine Gary Busey being. It's fine. Marty enlists the help of his sister Jane and hunt down the identity of the werewolf, finally convincing his uncle to take Jane's silver cross and Marty's silver medallion to the gunsmith, who melts them down into a silver bullet. Oh wait, that's the name of the movie. It also leads into a full moon standoff that is well played out and suspenseful. Many agree that Silver Bullet is just a fun watch with the 80s ambience and nostalgia that just has the right mix of camp humor and horror. And hey, did I mention Gary Busey? Thankfully, he didn't try to snort cocaine off the werewolf's fur. This time. We're at the halfway point now, and of course we can't have a best werewolf movie list without The Howling. Released in 1981, the same year as Wolfman and An American Werewolf in London, latter of which overshadowed this fantastic movie. It was made in a mere 28 days, directed by the horror fan favorite Joe Dante, who had made Piranha previously and later went on to do Gremlins. The Howling has one of the best special effects transformations in a werewolf movie, even to this day. Created by Rob Bottin, an assistant to the legendary Rick Baker, Bottin took over the FX duties after Baker left to do American Werewolf in London for John Landis. The movie plot revolves around a TV reporter, Karen White, played by Screen Queen Dee Wallace, who after being stalked and attacked by a serial killer, ends up with selective amnesia, is sent to stay at a cabin resort community by her doctor. However, things begin to unravel as she discovers that the community is home to a serial killer who we find out is a werewolf. And the members of this simple little forest resort are all members of his pack, and they want to keep their secret. Karen then has to defend herself and escape this community alive. Besides the awesome werewolf transformation scene, this movie stands out to me the most by its fantastic twist ending, where Karen ends up transforming into a werewolf herself while broadcasting news live on air. There were several sequels to this movie which didn't live up to the original, but a couple did stand out to me personally, and I highly suggest checking them out if you like direct-to-video B-movies. The Howling 5 Rebirth is set in a castle where a group of people are invited to stay and slowly killed off one by one. I love this particular sequel because it was more of a mystery trying to figure out who the werewolf is, almost kind of like Scream, and trying to figure out who the killer is there. The other Howling film that I consider to be quite good is the sixth film. With the backdrop of a traveling freak show circus, it's a classic werewolf versus vampire movie that I thoroughly enjoy, and even stars the remarkable Bruce Payne, who you may know from the Dungeons & Dragons movie, Highlander 3, and he even replaced Julian Sands in Warlock 3. Payne always plays an amazing role as his characters, and he really brought to life the villainous circus owner slash vampire, R.B. Harker. Although I am not including the original Wolfman from 1941 in this list, I am definitely including the 2010 remake. It's a highly underrated movie starring Benicio del Toro, Emily Blunt, Hugo Weaving, and the legendary Anthony Hopkins. It even won an Oscar for makeup thanks to, once again, Rick Baker and his masterful use of practical prosthetic work. Like seriously, I feel like any top-notch werewolf movie needs to have his input or involvement somehow. Unfortunately, he's retired now, but I digress. Benicio del Toro stars as Lawrence Talbot, who returns to his ancestral home to find his brother has been killed. Reunited with his estranged father, played by Anthony Hopkins, Lawrence sets out to find his brother's killer, while an unknown brutal and savage beast is killing all the villagers. During the chaotic, well-done, bloody, and gory massacre on the gypsy camp, Lawrence is bitten and takes upon the curse of the werewolf himself, soon after discovering a dark family secret. Hugo Weaving, who plays a determined Scotland Yard inspector, suspects Lawrence is the actual killer and takes him back to London to an asylum, which leads to a fantastic, tense transformation scene in an observation room. Once Lawrence escapes, he returns home to confront the real killer with a werewolf versus werewolf all-out battle. The settings used in this movie is one of the main reasons I love it so much and prefer the modern version over the original. The eerie, gloomy family estate, the massacre at the gypsy camp, Lawrence's escape across the rooftops of Victorian London all stand out to me, as well as performances by its cast. It's also the same reason I enjoy Mary Shelley's Frankenstein as well. Most people would put American Werewolf in London as their number one choice, but not me. I definitely respect the hell out of the film though, which is one of the reasons I put the movie at number 3 and set behind others that I find more enjoyable personally. Again, it's totally just my opinion, and I do think the film earns its respect and love from werewolf fans everywhere. While backpacking through northern England, 2 American students, David and Jack, get attacked by a werewolf. While Jack is killed, David manages to survive but is seriously injured. He wakes up 3 weeks later in a London hospital, where he's interviewed by a police inspector who tells him that he and Jack were attacked by an escaped lunatic. David insists they were attacked by some sort of wolf. Soon after, David starts having nightmares, and the ghost of his friend Jack appears and explains the beast that attacked them was indeed a werewolf, and after being bitten, he is now as well. Jack urges David to kill himself before the next full moon, not only because Jack is cursed to linger undead for as long as the bloodline of the werewolf that attacked them survives, but also to prevent David from inflicting the same fate on anyone else. David just writes it off as his imagination and a trauma though, and after getting released from the hospital, moves in with the nurse he met there and fell in love with, Alex. Soon he starts to see Jack again, who gives him one more warning before the full moon. Still unwilling to believe his friend's warning, and the next night we get the best werewolf transformation scene in the history of film so far, thanks to Rick Baker. Yep, that guy. This scene alone is the reason I consider American Werewolf in London to be great. I personally find the movie moves too slowly for my taste and just doesn't check all the boxes. And I'm sure many of you would disagree. Still, the transformation scene itself is absolutely amazing. Like seriously, and I give props to the movie for that. Even though John Landis mostly doesn't show the werewolf a lot during the movie except in glimpses, there's plenty of blood and gore to go around, with the mauling that starts off the film, as well as the end where David transforms into the werewolf and goes on a rampage through Piccadilly. Both of these scenes are standout parts of the film, in my opinion, and I remember them fondly. Ginger Snaps. Yes, that's right, Ginger Snaps is my number 2 pick on this list. There's something about this movie that I love and I feel puts it towards the top. Originally, I had it much lower on the list, but after doing a last passover, I decided to deserve this spot instead. Ginger Snaps is a 2000 cult classic, a coming-of-age take on the lore that follows 2 socially outcast sisters, Ginger and Bridget, who have an unhealthy fascination and obsession with death and the macabre. When out late one night, they are inevitably attacked by the werewolf, and Ginger gets bitten. Soon after, she begins her steady transformation, presenting the changes as a twisted metaphor of puberty. Bridget desperately tries to find a cure before the next full moon as her sister starts to enjoy her newfound powers. I absolutely enjoy the makeup effects in this film. Ginger's wolf design as she changes to the film is definitely one of my favorites. Although it wasn't really well received initially, it has found its cult following after a home video release and won numerous accolades. It also spawned 2 different sequels, both of which are also great and well worth the watch. Currently, there's even talk of a TV series in development as well. Horror movies that deal with teenagers often don't showcase realistic teenage life, but Ginger Snaps is an exception with an emotional touch to it. Emily Perkins and Catherine Isabel, who played the sisters, give an absolutely stellar performance, and as far as the blood and kill goes in this movie, you will not be disappointed as there is tons of it. I did say in the beginning this was going to be a controversial list, didn't I? Can't say I didn't warn you. American Werewolf in Paris, I feel, is highly underrated. Overshadowed by the success of the first film, and many feel like it didn't live up to the expectations, I, for one, absolutely love this movie, and I feel it's my favorite werewolf movie of all time. I know, that's saying a lot, and giving the movie a lot of credit, which I'm sure most of you will disagree with. The plot follows Andy, played by Thomas Everett Scott, and his friends, Brad and Chris. They're on an extreme sports tour, which seems to be pretty much sponsored by themselves. They go throughout Europe and do extreme stunts off of different structures illegally. Andy is apparently pretty far behind on points, but he plans to take a big lead with his stunt of bungee jumping off the Eiffel Tower, when a distraught Seraphine, played by Julie Delpy, shows up. As she jumps off the Eiffel Tower trying to commit suicide, Andy tries to play the hero and jumps after her, executing a mid-air bungee jump rescue. He saves her, but hits his head on a beam as Seraphine disappears in the night. Andy becomes intrigued by the mystery woman he's saved, and him and his friends try to track her down, basically stalking her. In the process meets Claude, extremely shady guy who invites him and his friends to a rave at a club later that night. When the trio arrive at the club, Andy finds Seraphine, who warns him to leave before the rave becomes a slaughterhouse, as Claude and his goons transform into werewolves and straight up murder the dance floor. Brad is killed, Andy and Chris escape, but not before Andy's attacked and bitten, saved by Seraphine, who we now find out is actually the daughter of David and Alex from the original London film. I've seen this movie a lot, and I don't remember anywhere in this film that explains this or even really mentions it at all, but according to the internet, that's where this and the original film connect. I guess this little bit of info got left in the cutting room floor. At this point, Andy finds out that having been bitten, it is now becoming a werewolf, and the plot starts to get a little off the rails as we discover Chris has been kidnapped by Claude and his goons, who really just hate Americans. Andy eventually transforms and kills a woman he meets at a bar, played by Modern Family's Julie Bowen, and a cop that had been trailing him because he suspects him of being the killer at the club. We also see a return of some of the original plot devices here, where Andy can see the ghost of his friend who was killed, as well as Julie, who adds a comedic tone to the movie by trying to get him killed constantly so she can rest in peace. Meanwhile, the plot really goes off the rails, with Claude and his werewolf brethren planning to have another rave to kill as many people as they can, preferably us lazy Americans, using a serum that allows them to change into their beast forms at any time, no need for a full moon. Andy and Seraphine then team up to rescue Chris and stop Claude's plans of werewolf domination. Yeah, this movie's plot is just outrageous. I fully admit it, but it's a fun outrageous and easy enough to follow along with. You can't really say it's a bit hard to believe because we are actually watching a werewolf movie after all. The movie opened at 7th place and just barely made more than it cost to make it by the end of its run. It also got a 3.7 out of 10 average rating on Rotten Tomatoes. Unlike its predecessor, which had Oscar-winning special effects, American Werewolf in Paris relied heavily on CGI, and a lot of fans took offense at that. It was even nominated as the worst sequel at the '97 Stinkers Bad Movie Awards, losing to Speed 2. Even John Landis himself said he was disappointed when he saw it. So after all of that, why do I put this as my number one pick? Well, I can't really say for sure why I adore this movie so much. I just do. There's something about it. I actually had seen it before I ever saw An American Werewolf in London in its entirety, which may have given me a set of fresh eyes looking at this film and not comparing it to the original. I'm well aware people hate the movie, but I think it's just great fun. I will totally agree that CGI over practical effects was a letdown, but they aren't terrible in my opinion, and I would much rather have saw practical effects used. After looking at all the films I put on this list, amazing as they are, I still find An American Werewolf in Paris to be my personal favorite. I've watched it about a dozen or more times. Its goofy humor, the action sequences, and the massacre in the club is frightening and blood-filled. The fight scenes at the end, and probably one of the things that stands out the most to me about the movie was the soundtrack, with Mouth by Bush featuring prominently in the film and the trailer. I think it might actually be the song that makes me love American Werewolf in Paris so much. I don't know. This movie also just came out at a time in my life that it really just left an impression on me, and really don't know why that is. There was never any chance of a sequel living up to the original in this case, but yeah, if you just turn off your brain for a while, the movie's just a great popcorn flick, and my number one werewolf movie. Do you agree with the list? Did I miss a great werewolf movie? Did your favorite werewolf movie make the cut? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe, as it truly helps the channel grow. I'll see you next time.